Thank you. Thank you, panel. We are here now for the final and most important session of the day, the India-EU Free Trade Agreement. And it's a critical session because this is also something that can create a new pathway between Sweden and India and also showcase some sunrise opportunities, we hope. And so without further ado, I give it over to you, Aarti Davis, the lead business development, co-development, lead IT secretariat, Stockholm Environmental Institute. And Aarti, you've been fantastic. Can we give Aarti a big round of applause? Thank you. You deserve this because you've been moderating a lot of sessions this morning and I've received such amazing feedback. So happy to have you here to give this final session. Over to you, Aarti.
Thank you so much, Sanju. And of course, this session is here and now. We've been talking all day about some words you might have heard over the course of the last 12 years, optimization, for example, and how we can unlock working with industry, public, private. But the EU FTA, we're on the final stages of that. If you were following the news on the EU FTA, you know, of course, a few weeks ago, rounds were held in Delhi. There were dinners, there were lunches, there were roundtables on how to move forward. We were told when Piyush Goyal visited Sweden in June that we would have an EU FTA as a Christmas present in December. To understand how close we are and what is left to happen, I would like to call on stage Camilla Melander, Director General for Trade Policy, Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Aziz Ahuja, Director EU Policy, Svensk Näringsliv, Kamal Bali, President and MD Volvo Group India and Co-Chairman CI Europe Council, and Håkan Kingstedt, Chairman of Sweden-India Business Council. So Camilla will be joining us shortly, but we will start. Some of us were in the room for these discussions for the EU FTA agreements in Delhi. One of those people was Kamal Bali, understanding what's happening on the ground. So Kamal, I want to ask you, despite great progress, regulatory and administrative complexity, can you shed some light on the discussions on the EU FTA and what you see about India looking to address some of its key issues?
Welcome. Yeah. Well dressed. Okay, yeah. So Aarti, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to add my compliments to you for moderating so many sessions in a very, very good way, asking some very compelling questions. So it's good. And back to this final round. So just coming to the EU-India FTA negotiations, I think let's start with the good news first. I think the good news is, as per a person, I can't name him, very close to who has been personally a negotiator, it seems that the EU-India FTA negotiations are on a very good track. They're going to, as you rightly said, they should be done before Christmas this year. And there are no major challenges. I mean, the word he has used, in fact, I have got in writing here, there are no major challenges anymore in this. Obviously, we will now have to see what is the level, what is the extent and the depth of the FTA in terms of what all is it covering? Is it covering far enough, wide enough, or is has it left some very important topics which the industry has been wanting? Now, that's something which we will know, which we will not know now. But I guess things are on a good track. But of course, there are some sticking issues like on mobility, on uniformity of regulations on both sides. There are some EU wants, EU says that they don't have control over every country to that extent that they can have a very definitive regulation on every small aspect. So there are some challenges I can understand on both sides. India has issues on the agriculture side. So I think there are those details we will not know. But one thing is sure, that you will have an FTA, which is a very, very good thing to begin with. Something's better, because it's been 20 years we have been talking of FTAs, of almost quarter of a century, right? So I think it may be an early harvest FTA, so to say. It may not be 100% complete, but I think there will be an FTA.
Perfect, Kamal. So Camilla, with that, I'm going to come to you now, of course, because we've been hearing throughout the course of the day, we've been talking to industry, we've been talking to the public sector, and the referencing to the EU FTA unlocking potential has been mentioned multiple times in terms of where it can lead us, where we can leapfrog, where we can go. But this happens, of course, at a time of huge geopolitical uncertainty. With the challenges on the Sweden-India corridor and the opportunities here, how do you see the FTA playing into the India-Sweden relationship and deepening ties with that?
I would say the free trade agreement, when it comes into place, will be extremely important. We see that generally our Swedish companies really know how to make use of these free trade agreements. If we look at the CETA agreement that entered into force in 2017, we have more than doubled our trade with Canada. When it comes to the free trade agreement with South Korea, we had increased our trade by 87%. So I would say that our companies are really, really agile when it comes to understanding the benefits of the free trade agreement. And I just came back from Brussels last week, where we got an update on the state of the negotiations. The last round was just concluded in Delhi, and the next round will start on the 6th of October. So, I mean, from both the EU side and from the side of the Indian government, there is a very, very strong commitment to concluding the agreement before the end of this year. I'm not saying that there won't be obstacles, but we are really, really keen to get this into place, because India is such an important country, not only for Sweden, but for the European Union. So I think we are really, really crossing our fingers that some of the obstacles can be overcome, and that we can start talking about how we will implement it.
And of course, we had, with the whole European Commission going to Delhi soon after January to talk about how this can become a possibility. So it's clear intent is there on both sides. Now it's how to operationalize this. Håkan, I'd like to come to you now, of course, because the new EU strategy in India talks about business engagement, talks about security, talks about defense, technology trade councils. But from your perspective, representing Sweden-India Business Council, how does a government-to-government engagement deepen B2B collaboration?
First of all, I think it's a great point we are standing on today with the FTA. We've been talking about that, as you said, Kamal, for 20 years. It will be taking business to the next level, because this is really an opportunity for business moving on and do more engagement. I think government to government has done a fantastic job. I must really appreciate that they're closing the final negotiations, and hopefully it's signed by year end. This gives opportunities for business to open up more sectors. If I look at it from a European perspective, I would say that I would like to see high-tech agriculture. Many of you see maybe farmers on the land. I see super high-tech industry feeding huge populations. I see satellites driving drones, not for destroying areas, but for farming. I think the agriculture is driven by AI models that we have been talking about today from many perspectives. Today, China and US have the most capable AI model working today. I think it's time for EU and India to take up that challenge. I also would like to see that you mentioned security and defense. Let me add space. Look into Amazon launching their rockets last week. You know, in the Project 27, Project Kuiper, they launched it from Kennedy Space Centers. I would like to see more private companies in EU and India launching rockets for business. I mean, they launch rockets up to the lower orbit level, about 450 kilometers above Earth, for bringing peace, bringing business. So I would like to add space when you spoke about security and defense, space for business and space for private actors to move.
So there's also opportunities for how we can get business to actually expand its discussions and negotiations. And then Assis, you of course met with Piyush Goyal when he was here in June and had some discussions in the renditions before the December discussions. Now I want to ask you, what was the discussion at that time? There are some tricky points here when it comes to the FTA. We've heard from Camilla, we've heard from Kamal. It's not a straight line in terms of how we get to the output. For a meaningful FTA, for a win-win FTA, what do we need to see?
Thank you so much for that, Arti. And I would also just like to join Kamal and a lot of other people in this room in saying, what a star you are. You've done a fantastic job today, and I feel very secure sitting on a panel which you're moderating. I would say, you know, I've been working with the India-EU FTA for about 2.5 years. I'm from the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise. And when we started off, there was actually quite a little understanding on, I would say, both sides. I don't think the EU negotiators fully understood the sensitivities in certain sectors in India. And I think that on the Indian side, there was maybe not an understanding of how important trade is to get FDI into the country. And that's something I would like to come back to. But what we have tried to do, and I'm very glad that Kamal has it right there on the table, that he brought it up with him. What we did was in June, we, together with our sister organization in India, the Confederation of Indian Industry, we decided that we need to put out a blueprint, a recipe, if you like. I know you don't like to share your recipes, but here we are sharing a recipe. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to put out a recipe for the sticky points in the FTA. And what I would like to do is just very briefly talk about 4 points that we have brought up. And these are areas in the FTA that we have agreed with the Confederation of Indian Industry. This is a joint paper we have with them. So that means that this is the recipe for win-win. This is something that Indian businesses want. This is something that Swedish businesses want. And if we want it to be win-win and long-term sustainable, it has to work for both businesses. So what we said was, number one, we need to cut the tariffs. We are in a tariffs world. We're in a very tariffed world. We are all talking about Trump tariffs. It's the big elephant in the room, even though India should be the bigger elephant in the room. But we are in a world of Trump tariffs, and we need to cut the tariffs and fees, and we need to bind them, because businesses want to just know that what are the stable rules they're playing by. And there are certain areas, especially in agriculture, which are very sensitive to India and to a lot of countries in Europe as well. So we say, leave the sensitive agriculture out, because the big money is in the industrial goods. So stick to that. That is our first ingredient for this recipe. The second one is the issue of standards comes up. Environmental standards, health and safety standards are really important. It's something we should all strive towards. It's not a bad thing. What we need to do is we need to make sure that when we have two giants like the EU, like India, we need to make sure they are leaders. Not China, not the US. We should be the leaders in the international standard organizations. And what we can do in the FTA is that we can make sure that even if where the standards diverge between the EU and and India, we need to make sure that we can recognize each other's testing where in certain sectors where we can agree in the FTA. 2. Number 3, simplification. Oh my God, we talk about this. The Indian businesses need simplification in their home market, in the EU market, and our European, Swedish businesses, exactly the same. And we are, in our confederation, we're the #1 advocacy that goes around telling the EU, make sure that the implementation is the same throughout the EU 27 countries. That'll help us. It will definitely help the Indian businesses coming in. So this is something that needs to be done. We would like to see more digitalization, technical assistance to India for that, one-stop stops for customs clearances. You need to make sure that parts and goods can get into India easily so that they can become the manufacturing hub they want to be. And the very last point, I won't take up too much time, but it is a very important point, and I believe it's close to many people's hearts, and that is labor mobility and services. I think Hitesh, said 8,000 engineers a year. Yeah. One of our member organizations, 18,000 tech workers deficiency in Sweden a year, in Sweden alone, for the next 4 years. Those are our calculations. India has the people to bring in. We need the people. Now, this is something that is national competence. You can't actually put it into the FTA, but what we can do is that we can pool the national interests in the FTA. And we believe we should do that, and we should bring down all of the non-tariff barriers for services.
So, Aziz, I'm going to come to Kamal because it's the joint product between
Yes.
CAI and, of course, Svensk Näringsliv. So, in terms of the points you've put forward, Aziz, and the ways in which to work through them, they seem very rational, very straightforward. But we have sticky points here. Kamal, you've talked about agriculture, you touched about mobility. India has a demographic dividend that can actually address a lot of the problems that Sweden, for example, as part of the EU has. Your solutions, as far as the paper goes, seem very straightforward. What is blocking progress?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, whatever Aziz has articulated is absolutely spot on. And I think these are the key points from industries on both sides. And you will see if even 50% of this is implemented, the bilateral trade between EU and India will go at least 4x. 4x, because EU and India are punching below their weights today. The amount which we can do. Just imagine if a custom duty rate of 30% becomes 5%, for instance, for a finished good. There are so many new technologies and new products that can find way into India, which currently do not exist. So India can actually do a lot of catching up with better, with reduced, optimized tariffs. It's not going to hurt India. And on areas, the other point which we had said was that on areas, if there are some difficult areas, since EU is at a higher standard in terms of technology and quality, India is here right now, you keep the same standard but provide India a glide path. That okay, at the end of 2 years, you will be, from here you will be at this point. Provide a glide path, don't stop them. So I think that kind of understanding and partnership is required, and that's what I think both sides have been recommending. And I think that's the line of discussion which has been happening so far. And I think on 1 or 2 points on customs procedures and all, I think absolutely spot on. One point which I wanted to add, in addition to what is a very, very serious point, is it on customs issues, on litigations, on advanced pricing agreements. So there's a challenge. Many times the law in India takes 5 to 7 years or even 10 years to decide on a dispute. And in case the dispute gets settled against you, you have to pay interest for that period of 10 years or 8 years for the time. So one, we should have advanced pricing agreements. Before we start doing a particular transaction, we should agree with the government, this is the way we are going to do it. Is there any issue? No issue. Please go ahead, so that they don't come up later. Number one. Second, in case of litigation, if the litigation takes more than 1 or 2 years to get settled, there should be no interest penalty on the party. So I think that's very fair, because that's not because of the companies that the settlement is taking time. It's because the benches are not meeting, the courts are not meeting, they are taking time, they have too many cases, so the company should not suffer. So these are the 2 points which we have said. I hope some of these points will find way in the FTA, and I think this will really put away lots of stress from the companies' minds when it comes to litigations, That's very important.
Kamal, I'm going to come to you next, because now what you've heard from both Svenska Näringsliv and CII, the Confederation of Indian Industries, is that the benefits of the FTA come down to nuts and bolts. It comes down to the ease of doing business. It comes down to the everyday of how we can work together. Now, Kamal talks about the glide path, talks about incremental implementation, to understand the differences in both countries and the opportunities. When it comes to economic resilience, when it comes to marrying what we've talked about all day today is the innovation ecosystems of both India and Sweden, an EU FTA that takes into account these nuts and bolts, where will that take us?
That can take us to the sky. No, I just wanted to comment on what Aziz and Kamal were saying, how important it is that we have some predictability for our companies. We were just sitting down with our Minister of Trade just prior to coming here, that's why I was a bit late, talking about the agreement that we have between the EU and the United States, which is changing by the minute. Now suddenly it's kitchen cabinets, it's medical devices. Our companies don't know how to navigate. And if they want investments in the United States, they need to have some predictable terms. Nobody's going to invest when you know that things can change by the minute. And this is what an FTA can give us, this predictability. And India is such a fascinating market. It's over 1 billion consumers, combined with the 450 million consumers in the EU. What a huge market. It has only opportunities. But as you said, we need to address some of the non-tariff barriers. Do I need to mention the QDCs?
Yeah,
QCOs. This, for our companies, is a major challenge. So if that could be addressed in the FTA, that would be a big...
That is
big,
part of it.
Yeah. And I know that's where the difficult discussions are going on. I mean, we have a big presence in India. I think just looking 6 years back, our trade was it 13 billion Swedish crowns? Now it's above 22 billion Swedish crowns. We have 300 Swedish companies in India, and 100 of them have production, I think mostly in Bangalore, but also in other parts of India. So for our companies, and not only the big ones, also the smaller and medium-sized companies, to find the way to the Indian market and to understand what they need to do to cater that market, to cater for the South Asian market. I mean, I just see opportunities here. And I think actually what we need to do once we have the agreement in place, knock on wood, is that we need to start educating our companies about what the FTA entails so that they can start expanding even more. I would say 300 companies in India is quite a big footprint. And I mean, production. I mean, just to take one of those that have production, Volvo Cars, for example, and Volvo Trucks. The Indian automotive market is growing tremendously. I think it's 5 million cars that are, added every year. So not only for the Swedish automotive industry, but also for the European automotive industry, now that, tariffs are quite high on the other side of the Atlantic, if we can trade more, I just see it's a win-win situation.
You talk about the Europe, US, Sweden discussions and this uncertainty about what tomorrow holds when it comes to business navigating and being a little bit confused about how to move forward. This brings us to geopolitical risk, of course. We have an EU FTA, and one can ask if it's moving faster now because of geopolitical uncertainties in the rest of the world. So it's bringing these partners together and understanding together we can actually make this impact and to reduce the uncertainties that come with the alliances that are now shifting. For India and for Sweden, how does the FTA reduce that geopolitical risk? How do we work together to actually take care of some of the issues? And you put forward the recipe, and that recipe will go forward. But there are sticking points, and there are sticking points that will come in the way, potentially, of conversations in a B2B business. But if it goes forward, when it goes forward, we have a situation where we've de-risked partnership. What's the potential when we take that next step?
So what we've done is we've asked our companies a couple of questions. So last year, we asked them a very specific questions on de-risking from China. 45% of our companies said they would want to de-risk a part of their engagement in China and bring it home. So home shoring, closer to Europe. 10% of them said that they could consider moving from China into South and Southeast Asia. And for our companies, when we ask them about India, India is still a new market. All our big companies are there. We have more companies going there. But if we really want to get the scale, we want to get the innovative companies that can scale up in India, that can produce in India. Basically, they tell us the FTA is a game changer because it's a stamp of approval. So I think for us, it's that for the investors, it's a stamp of approval. And this is at a time where the demand for global investment is very high. I mean, Mario Draghi just said that the EU is going to need 800 billion euros a year in the next couple of years to reach its competitiveness and growth goals. It's not different anywhere else. So the competition is high, and getting the FTA done is a way of getting the investment into the country and being able to scale up and create those partnerships. Because a company that goes into produce in India is going to need to bring know-how, skills, services from other parts of the world when global value chains are so complex.
So these are MSMEs you're talking about?
As well. I think the bigger companies like Volvo, they have an easier, they have maybe more possibilities being a bigger company and having people on the ground to maybe navigate India. But I think if we want to do the big scale up, even from the bigger investors, we do see that they are telling us to get the FTA done.
Absolutely, no doubt about it, yeah.
No, but I think what you say, this stamp of approval, it's an interesting way of looking at it because, of course, when you work on the Sweden-India corridor, you just assume everyone knows about the Indian marketplace. And so when you say from the surveys you did that India is still a new market, relatively speaking, then this becomes a reference point to and say, we can go in now because, of course, look at where it's coming from. But Håkan, I'm going to come to you on this and say, Kamal, you mentioned MSMEs and SMEs and the potential because we need to help them move the muscle. Larger companies like Volvo, larger companies like, for example, SAB, they don't need that help as much because you understand the framework. But the MSMEs, the SMEs, the startups, they need that framework help, that reference help. And so when we have the EU FTA, the stamp of approval, like you say, we've opened the doors and we unlock potential. And how do you see the stamp of approval actually operationalizing increased discussions at that level?
I think it's a great opportunity for mid-sized companies in Sweden now. The large ones are already there. You mentioned the 300 companies right now. What FTA opens up for Swedish companies, that is the mid-cap sector, mid-cap companies. Small companies, scale up, startup is a different animal, you know. Startups need to get there, they need to start, they need to get funding and so on. But we have super qualified supply chains in Sweden that supply the Volvos and others, they could easily move into India now.
Yeah.
Then also, we need also to respect that today we have super high qualified Indian companies that also should move into Sweden. It must go in both directions to be a valued partner and create trust in the business community. And this is so important. And I think when this is signed, and I fully agree with you, Kamal. I mean, you have to have a gliding scale, You don't close the door if you don't get a full agreement. You negotiate in the Indian way, and find a solution.
Yes.
That's the important thing. And I think what you mentioned now, Camilla, is we need to communicate when it's signed. It need to go out to the Swedish companies, the chambers. They need to get that information, not only via a web page. We need to go out and communicate. SIBC could be one partner in the communication. Other agencies could be other partners, but we need to get out there. Because when you go to, I think the lady from Umeå or Luleå was here, that means when you talk to the business community in Luleå, you need to be there.
Yeah.
You need to talk with them. And you need to explain what are the new opportunities, because, as you said, India's not known, really. It's a long way for the small guys coming up, and here we have a job to do together. And that's important. Then it's also very much about supply chains resilience. Doing that with the unstable supply lines as we have today, you need to have alternatives. And India is a great alternative for supply chains for the future now. If we get, as you said, India and EU together, that's the biggest markets in the world, And if you get that question, what do we then need to do? We can't continue as we do today. We need to add services, support investments. And so far, I would love to see more Indians coming to Sweden to invest. Now we're talking about Swedish companies go to India. Sweden investors was really talking about the great opportunity they see in India today. Great, they have seen it, but what about the rest? I would love to see the top families from India visiting Sweden, because most of the startups, the great ideas we have in Sweden, leading innovation, or number 2, I think it's number 1 anyhow, they probably calculated wrong. So I would, instead of being picked up by American investors, I like to see more startups in India picked up by Indian investors. And by doing that, families meets families. Families meets families build trust. As we started with Michael in the morning, he thought the most important thing was trust, Yes. He didn't become a rock star, but if he comes here next year, play the guitar and sing, I will go in with a bass behind it.
Well, you've heard what Håkan is saying, and of course, there is so much optimism about what the EU FTA can do at all levels in terms of stakeholder discussions. But you also mentioned the word, Håkan, of alternatives. And I actually want to come to alternatives and opportunity cost, because the EU FTA and the Sweden-India discussion, the larger EU discussion, is happening at the cost of other discussions. Geopolitical alliances have shifted. So you have an EU FTA that Sweden is looking to enter into as part of the EU. But what does this do for other discussions like strategic dependencies in terms of reliances that Sweden has in other levels of the supply chain that is now beyond the focus of discussion here?
Yeah, that's a really important question that you're addressing because we are at a geopolitical situation where we really need to see where we have our friends. And we're not only negotiating the free trade agreement with India, the EU that is, but also with Mercosur, with Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, UAE, and we're thinking about restarting with Australia, and we also want to get closer to the CPTPP. Because we need to uphold rules-based trade, and we need less protectionism and more free trade. So if anything good has come out of this situation that we see now is that there is really a sense of urgency in the EU. When I go to the meetings in Brussels, it's really operational. Also, talking about what you talked about earlier, Aziz, about increasing or cutting red tape within the European Union. I mean, we have the same discussion after the Draghi and Letta reports. We need to cut the red tape. We need to take away or deregulate and simplify and digitalize. But, I mean, yeah, talking about new alliances, I mean, we see that, I mean, India's big and mighty country as it is, it's a member of BRICS. We saw India at the conference in Shanghai. But, I mean, we would really like to see that India wants to be one of our closer partners. But, I mean, looking at it, I mean, we are also, as Sweden, we're part of different alliances. We're part of the Nordic, I mean, we work very closely with our Nordic neighbors. We work very closely with the European Union. We're now a member of NATO. So, I mean, we all belong to different groupings, and I think we should not over-dramatize anything. And Sweden and India are extremely aligned, and both wanting to uphold the international rules-based order, and strong believers in the UN, in the WTO, rules-based trade. So I think we should continue working on deepening our relationship, both on a bilateral basis, but also on a multilateral basis. And India is a really strong and important and vocal partner on the world scene. And I think if we can conclude this FTA, I think we will get even closer than we are today. And I think, so that's another very positive side of this agreement.
What we heard today in the conversations in the panels this morning is the importance, and I think you've touched upon it, trust. And part of the trust is being able to talk through difficult times. Part of the trust is finding alignment because you see eye to eye on certain issues. And so what you're saying really is the EU-FTA is one more step in that trust-building exercise between the EU and India here, and of course bilateral trade. Yes. But I want to come to a case study question, Kamal, because now coming from CII, from Volvo, from the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in India, you, of course, Volvo has made very clear their Make in India ambition. Make in India for India, make in India for the world. When you're making in India, and I think Aziz touched upon this too, talking about manufacturing, talking about production. So in order to make in India, you must import into India. So you sit on both sides of this free trade agreement. You sit on both sides of both non-tariff barriers and tariff barriers. What do you need to see as a producer, as a manufacturer, to go forward?
I think that's really, first of all, I completely agree with you. I mean, on another point, on the multilateral, I would say, issues other than the trade. I think that position is absolutely in order, and I can tell you that India is also looking forward to improving the ties with the Western world in a very, very big way. So that's one. So I think coming to Make in India, so currently our import content is pretty low. For instance, it's about 25% the local content is about 25%. This will move to about 60%, the local content. So I think that's one. So a lot of Swedish suppliers will set up base in India. So that's the big, what Håkan said, that's another spin-off of this. A lot of Swedish manufacturers, medium-sized companies are also planning to set up shop here. And likewise, many Indian suppliers are moving to Europe. Some of them are like Bharat Forge, and many others are also setting shop in India. So I think with the FTA, it's like a guarantee, it's like a seal. It's like an insurance that, okay, everything is fine, things will get taken care of, whether it is the procedures, the rules, or whatever. So that's the expectation. And I feel, and I'm very confident that this is going to really lead to a spin-off effect, spiraling effect in many other sectors. That's one. The another area is services. You will find services trade also increasing big time. Once you have the confidence in the two sides, I think that trade you will also see multiple growth in that area also. So I'm very confident that if this FTA gets done, which it should, I mean, I'm pretty much certain, and if the FTA brings in the possibilities, as like she said, from 30% duty on a car, for instance, today a fully built car, it could be about 60% duty. If that, and if it is assembled in India, it's 30%. If there is FTA, it could be 10% or 5%. Imagine the amount of market which opens up for some of the European companies in India. And then thereafter they will also start localizing. There would be a requirement that at least 20-30% should be local content. So you will find it's a win-win. It's going to be, in my view, a win-win for all. So therefore, FTA is a next big thing. But more importantly, as we discussed in the morning, I think trust is going to be the key. Ultimately, if we want looking at long term, and to build that trust, there need to be transparency. Transparency will lead to trust, walking the talk, being transparent, leading to trust, and trust will lead to partnership. So I think, to my mind, that's the clear recipe: transparency, trust, collaboration. And that's what we're looking forward, that both sides should demonstrate that more often and more vocally and more clearly than ever before.
So that comes to my last question now for the panel, how we started. You talk about industrial clusters, a spiral effect, kind of this exponential effect, should these partnerships happen. Now, Assis, I started by asking you a few questions ago about your visit, well, Piyush Goyal's visit here and your discussions. We were told, and we've been told time and again, that we will have an EU FTA by Christmas, and that we will move into the new year with a whole new trade environment in front of us. Will this happen? And what are the steps between now and the FTA being signed?
I wish I had a crystal ball, but I'm going to go with my general sort of economic model of predictions. I think what we have seen this year, and we saw it before actually all the Trump tariffs started up and all those discussions, we saw a huge push by the President of the European Commission and Prime Minister, the Honorable Prime Minister Modi. When the whole Commission went to India, he mobilized his cabinet of ministers. And I think in the whole time that I've been working with India closely, which has been since 2015, I have never seen that kind of rhetoric coming out of India. So there is a huge political understanding for where this can go and where it can ricochet India's economy. Because if India is going to be competitive, if the EU is going to be binding FTAs with Indonesia, with Vietnam, with Thailand, India cannot be left behind. And since it is a crowded space for investment and investment capital, I think this is really important. I believe the push is there. And I believe that we will reach what is possible is a political agreement by the end of the year. A lot of the tough issues have been solved. The IPR issues have been solved already in the FTA. So we're getting there. and the negotiators will, through this political agreement, have what they need to make it to the finish line. And I think that that is going to be just in everyone's general interest.
Before we close today's panel, Isis, I'm going to ask you, that political agreement, can business use it?
No, they cannot, because this has to be translated into hundreds of pages of legal text. It has to be, there are codes for each tariff, for each part of a little component of a good. So I think there's still going to be a lot of work left to do. And then also politically within the EU, we have to also remember that this any agreement that is followed through has to be agreed upon with a qualified majority in the European Council by the 27 countries, but also by the European Parliament. And the European Parliament may have certain issues that are still sticky points for them, but which we are going to move. And I think there, Kamal, you're very right. What we need to do is make sure that the negotiators are able to do a kind of a gliding path. Certain things need to come into, to be commercially meaningful. They need to come into effect right away. Other things maybe need to be given a little time, but I do believe for businesses to get the predictability, Camilla, that you're talking about, we need to know what that gliding path looks like, and that they can have in the negotiations. So, fingers crossed.
Thank you so much. So trust and transparency, but moving towards targets. Thank you. Thank you. So that's the last panel. So EU FTA, political agreement by Christmas, come back for the industrial agreement.